Hello there, my name is Jeff, and you're watching my final project video. I did my project on Republican control in the South. The topics I will be covering are these: Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, Andrew Johnson and Presidential Reconstruction, the Freedmen's Bureau, the 13th Amendment, Radical Reconstruction, the Black Codes, the 14th and 15th Amendment, the KKK, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, Compromise of 1876, and the Civil Rights Movement. And just keep in mind, I will not be going into all of these topics in depth. Some of them will just be mentioned. Alright, now to start on part 1. Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. In the early days of the Civil War, to the dismay and anger of the radical abolitionists, President Abraham Lincoln did not make the abolishment of slavery a goal of the Union, as he feared that the action would push the border states to the Confederacy and anger the more conservative Northerners. However, this changed by summer of 1862, as enslaved people pushed the issue by fleeing to the Union by the thousands as lynch streams marched through the South. This action advocatively debunked a strong myth that black people were content with enslavement and convinced Lincoln that the emancipation was both a political and military necessity. In response, Lincoln announced on September 22, 1862, the Emancipation Proclamation, and as of January 1, 1863, all enslaved people fighting against the Confederacy shall forever be free. Fun fact, the proclamation only be the slaves of the Confederacy, not the border states. That would be fixed until the 13th Amendment. Over the next few years, Lincoln pondered how to welcome the South back to the Union, and as the war was coming to a close in early 1865, he still had no clear plan. However, on a speech delivered on April 11th, while referring to the Reconstruction plans for Louisiana, he had the audacity to, at the time, propose that some black people, including freed people and those who had served in the military, the right to vote. He was assassinated 3 days later, so the Reconstruction plan would fall onto his successor, Andrew Johnson. Part 2. Andrew Johnson and the Presidential Reconstruction period. At the end of May 1865, Andrew Johnson announced his Reconstruction plans, which reflected both his unionism and firm beliefs in state rights. From Johnson's point of view, the South hadn't lost the right to govern themselves, and thus the federal government had no right to determine voting requirements or other state-level policies. Under Johnson's presidential Reconstruction, all land that had been confiscated by the Union Army was to be distributed to the formerly enslaved people by the Army and the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was formerly known as the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, established in 1865 by Congress to help the former black slaves and poor whites in the South in the aftermath of the war. The Freedmen's Bureau provided food, housing, medical aid, and they established schools and offered legal assistance. It was also intended to settle the former slaves on land confiscated or abandoned during the war. However, the Bureau wasn't able to accomplish all that it wanted to due to a lack of funding, a shortage of staff, and political historical things such as race, or the land was to be reverted to its pre-war owners. Upon being required to uphold the abolition of slavery in compliance with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which finally got rid of slavery in the border states, swore loyalty to the Union, pay out their war debt, and the Southern government were given free rein to rebuild themselves. As a result of Johnson's leniency, many states in 1865 and 1866 successfully enacted a series of laws known as the Black Codes, which were designed to restrict freed people's activity and ensure their ability as a labor force. Basically, slavery part 2. These repressive codes angered many in the North, including numerous members of Congress who refused to seat any congressmen and senators elected from the southern states. This also undermined the support for Johnson and the Republican Party. In early 1866, Congress passed the Freedmen's Bureau and Civil Rights Bills, setting on the Johnson for his signature. The first bill, the Bureau Bill, extended the life of the Bureau, which was intentionally established as a temporary organization, but it was to be extended to something a bit more permanent. After Johnson vetoed the bill, causing a permanent rupture in his relationship with Congress that would eventually lead to his impeachment in 1868, the Civil Rights Act became the first major bill to become law over presidential veto. Part 3. Radical Reconstruction. After the Northern voters rejected Johnson's policies in the congressional elections in late 1866, radical Republicans in Congress took a firm hold of the Reconstruction in the South. The following March, again over Johnson's veto, Congress passed the Restoration Act of 1867, which temporarily divided the South into 5 military districts and outlined how governments based on universal male suffrage were to be organized. The law also required Southern states to fully ratify the 14th Amendment, which broadened the definition of citizenship, granting equal protection in the Constitution to formerly enslaved people before they can join the Union. In February 1869, Congress approved the 15th Amendment, adopted in 1870, which guaranteed that a citizen's right to vote would not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. By 1870, all former Confederate states had been admitted to the Union, and the states' constitutions during the years of radical Reconstruction were the most progressive in the region's history. The participation of African Americans in Southern public life after 1867 would be by far the most radical development of the Reconstruction period, which was essentially a large-scale experiment in interracial democracy, unlike that of any society following the abolishment of slavery. Southern black people won the election to Southern state governments into the U.S. Constitution during that period. Among the other achievements of Reconstruction were the South's first state-funded public school systems, more equitable taxation, legislation, laws against racial discrimination in public transport, accommodations, and economic development programs, including aid to railroads and other enterprises. Part 4. Reconstruction comes to an end. After 1867, an increasing number of Southern whites turned to violence in response to the revolutionary changes of radical Reconstruction. The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations targeted local Republican leaders, both white and black, and other African Americans who challenged white authority. The federal legislation passed during the administration of President Ulysses S. Grant in 1871, taking aim at the KKK and others who attempted to interfere with black suffrage and other political rights. White supremacy gradually reasserted its hold on the South after the early 1870s as support for Reconstruction waned. Racism was still a potent force in both the South and North, and Republicans became more conservative and less egalitarian as the decade continued. In 1874, after an economic depression plunged most of the South into poverty, the Democratic Party won control of the House of the Representatives for the first time since the Civil War. When Democrats waged a campaign of violence to take control of Mississippi in 1865, Grant refused to send federal troops, marking the end of federal support for the Reconstruction era. State governments in the South By 1876, only Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina were still in the Republicans' hands. In the contested presidential election that year, Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes reached a compromise with the Democrats in Congress. In exchange for the certification of his election, he announced Democratic control of the entire South. The Compromise of 1876 marked the end of the Reconstruction period. But the struggle to deal with the revolution ushered in by slavery's eradication would continue in the South and elsewhere long after that date. A century later, the legacy of the Reconstruction era would be revived during the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, as African Americans fought for political, economic, and social equality that had long been denied to them. And that was Republican control in the South. Started out pretty great, some people made some bad decisions, and then everything started to go down. On from there, as racism and political power, the political powers were waning. And that was my final project. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like. Go ahead and hit that like button. Save it to a playlist. Maybe I'll make more if you'll yell at me enough. Maybe I'll make more of these if y'all yell at me enough. Alright. Thank you for watching, and good night. Or good evening, or good morning, depending on when you watch this.